Welcome to Null News Now. My name is Merrick Counts, and I will be your host for tonight's tech news. As always, we're going to jump right into security. All right. So offensive securities, the makers of Kali Linux, one of the most notorious security-based penetration testing Linux distributions, has released WinKelix 2.0. What this is it's Kali Linux on WSL2. So if you're a Windows user and want to run Kali Linux and don't want a dual boot or want a quick alternative that you can hop to while Windows is still running, this is a great thing. It even gives you the full UI. So if you're not used to using the things by the command line, this is a fantastic option. So go ahead and check it out. It packs a ton of security features to let you get through your day. All right, Google's G Suite suffered some pretty major service outages, but I don't think that it affected any of its GCP offerings. So I think you're good there. In the larger news, the U.S. feds, now they didn't disclose which agency, but one of the agencies suffered a successful multi-stage malware attack that allowed the hackers to successfully infiltrate their VPN and actually allowed them to get through their VPN, log in as their VPN through the VPN multiple times. So this just is reason to make sure you're staying on top of the security. They haven't released any other details that we could learn from, except that I do believe it started with a phishing email and allowed them to hack through their email and then eventually get to the VPN. So always make sure you verify where those emails come from. Oh, that brings me to another story where there was a European news company who did a phishing testing on their employees, and it was the phishing email was going to give them a paycheck, and they were already a hurting company who laid off. So they're under a lot of scrutiny because it was quite mean because they were offering them money. But that was their test to test their employees. All right. Then Windows XP code gets leaked online. Now, honestly, other than the security that it was leaked, Windows XP has been out of support. So you shouldn't be using Windows XP anyways. Microsoft should have donated Windows XP code when Windows XP was no longer supported. This should have been like their standard playbook. I honestly think that Microsoft should open source. They can make their own license. Windows in general, they already have. Now, some of the reasons you wouldn't want to open source it is that they work with proprietary drivers. And so if you wanted to say that, like, okay, they're not going to open source the VMware, or not VMware, the Hyper-V layer, where Hyper-V actually is the thing that interfaces with the hardware. And I'm sure that they have a lot of proprietary drivers that are built into that layer. And if you want to say they don't open source that, great. But the Windows 10 kernel and the Windows 10 user space all run on top of that and shouldn't have to have any of that garbage in them. So really, Windows 10, everything from the Hyper-V up should be open source. There's no reason not to. You can even do it with a license so that you can't run Windows 10 without paying for it if they're really worried about that. But that's something you should think about, Microsoft. If you want to consult me, please feel free to do so. All right, let's move on to open source and Kubernetes. There's actually a really interesting project in here, and that's Determined. It is a open source deep learning training platform, and Determined now supports Kubernetes. So you can run your Determined workloads in Kubernetes, and this allows you to empower your Determined workflows in a Kubernetes way where you can scale them horizontally. So this is really cool if you used it. If you don't know what Determined is, it's actually a pretty cool project to look into anyways if you're interested in machine learning. And so you should go check that out. And Terra was just released and is a VMware project. It is a Kubernetes networking solution and was designed to be Kubernetes native. It operates on layers 3 and 4 of the OCI networking model and leverages Open vSwitch as the network data plane. It's on its very early stages. It was just released to the public. It's on a 0.1 release. And it's definitely worth checking out. It's a project I plan to keep my eye on for the future. All right, so let's move to the cloud. There was a lot of cloud news happening. So we're going to start with Azure because we're going in not alphabetical order because that would be AWS. Anyways, Azure launched Azure Communication Services, which to me, the biggest competitor to Azure Communication Services would be like things like Twilio. And this will let users add voice, video, chat, and text messages to their applications, and really is the most complete offering of these solutions out of any of the other major cloud providers other than Twilio, which isn't really a cloud provider. They provide a single service. Now, I wasn't able to find pricing because I wanted to compare pricing to Twilio versus Azure Communication Services. The SMS services for and the texting messages, text messages for Azure won't really launch until October. And so until October, they haven't released the pricing details. So it's yet to be seen whether it's going to be cheaper or more expensive than Twilio, but hopefully it brings some competition there. And we see some decreases in pricing from some good competition in the market. Now, I do know that AWS and GCP have some of the same offerings, just not a complete suite that is as easy to use. On other Azure news, the Microsoft genomics, not a very easy word for me to say for some reason. Anyways, has released several open source GitHub projects that I think are worth checking out. First, Cromwell, not a Microsoft project, is an open source workflow management system geared towards scientific workflows. If you don't know what that is, you should check it out, especially if you do a lot of data analysis. The cool thing Microsoft released was the whole project to run it on Azure. So they made some very easy way to run it, and they open sourced it as well. So the entire thing is open source, and then you can run it on Azure. And then they also released the genomics notebooks, and is a really cool collection of Jupyter notebooks with sample genomic data analysis. So if that's something that you're interested in, obviously I'm not a genome person, but if that is you and you're interested in learning on what Microsoft has done so far, that it looks like a great place to start. So now let's move on to AWS. AWS released AWS Glue Studio. So it's a visual interface to the AWS Glue. So if you're using Glue, you can now use Glue Studio, and you can use it as a visual representation and interact with it visually. So looks interesting, especially if you don't like using the command line. The other thing that they released was the AWS Perspective, and it looks to be a pretty cool project that helps you build architectural diagrams of your AWS workloads. So it basically takes your AWS infrastructure and helps you build architectural diagrams based off of it. So I think that could really be useful if you have a large infrastructure that you haven't had well documented and you're tasked with doing that. I think that this would be a great place to start to help you get a good feel and overview of your project. And that was pretty much it for AWS. It was pretty quiet. Usually they're one of the more chatty. They did have some other minor things like availability expansion, but they expand the availability of everything almost every week. So, all right, let's talk about GCP. One of the things that they have been working on over the last several months is observability of workflows in the compute engine. And they have just this week released the first wave of these enhancements, which added significantly improved operating system support for the cloud monitoring and cloud logging agents. So the agents now, you can look at the link below to find all the different OSs now supported, but it is a plethora of Linux and Windows and I believe they even have a Mac agent now. So their monitor agents got vastly improved as to the number. They also added the ability to rapidly deploy, update, and remove agents from the groups of VMs. So you could target whole groups of VMs to do it and do it very easily. And even added the ability to do it by policy so that it could be automated with a single G-Cloud command. So really, this is a pretty big deal. And then they added some new VM-specific features to the cloud monitoring console. And the link to that, where you can read it in detail, is linked below. So the next thing has to do with machine learning and Kubernetes in Google. So what is it? It is the AI platform prediction, and it's based on the GKE, or Google Kubernetes engine. It is designed for better reliability with more flexibility and new hardware engines. So they expanded the Google compute machine types and the NVIDIA accelerator types that are available and brought it to general availability. And so if you're using the AI platform prediction, there are new machines out there available and less overhead latency and tail latency. So it's quite improved. And on top of that, cloud monitoring now gives you a zero config out of the box visibility for your entire Google Compute Engine VM fleet. So now, without any extra configuration, you can get out of the box visibility on all of your VMs. I think that this is way bigger deal than a lot of things, because visibility is one of those things that's really hard to do right and can take quite a bit of work. And it looks like they have tried to simplify that. Talking about observability, let's move on to technology now. A new project coming from a super secret company that I never even heard of until this week is WhyLabs. That's WHY Labs. So WhyLabs came out of stealth mode this week, and it looks to provide a really interesting take on the machine learning. Everybody is trying to jump on the machine learning bandwagon, if you understand the American colloquialism. Well, I shouldn't speak English because obviously I suck at it. But the machine learning has been dominated by a lot of large players, and they're all looking at making workflows and pipelines and all of these things to help you bring machine learning workflows from data collection to model training to serving. And they have really been working on that. So projects like Kubeflow, something we do cover from time to time on this channel, all look at providing ways of doing this. But very rarely have you seen one committed to monitoring and observability of those pipelines. And that is what WhyLabs has come out and done. Now, I couldn't find a dedicated commitment to open source or how much of their products they plan to have open source, but I did find their GitHub account and some open source projects in it. Now, I'm not going into any details of them. I have linked down below their GitHub repository if you want to look into it. But they came out and said that they are looking and what their goal is machine learning observability. So they're looking at making machine learning more observable. And I think that this is really fantastic because I think it's something that the community has been lacking in recently. Talking about machine learning, Microsoft's investment into OpenAI seems to have paid off already as they get an exclusive deal for GPT-3. Now, if you don't know what GPT-3 is, it is a machine learning model made by OpenAI that has proven to be really interesting and done quite well. I have a link to GPT-3 down below if you're interested in seeing it. I'm not quite sure what the exclusivity deal entails in its entirety, but I can guarantee you that this is going to be really exciting for any of you Azure users, because the amount of services Microsoft could build through GPT-3 and provide you out-of-the-box solutions for things is quite astounding and probably quite useful. So even if you don't use GPT-3 directly through Azure, they could provide services through Azure. So a quick and probably stupid one would be like, you can ask it a question and it will generate a random response. Or you could ask it to generate a 5-page story. That could be a service that Microsoft provides, and you don't have to program GPT-3. So anyways, I'm looking forward to that, to see what they bring through their cloud offering. All right. Another piece of exciting news, because as you know, I'm a pretty big Linux fan. Lenovo begins selling OEM Ubuntu PCs. Now, I personally feel like they missed the boat here using Ubuntu. They probably could have found a superior Linux distribution. And no, I'm not talking about Red Hat or Fedora. But it is really good for the Linux community, because Linux has struggled getting into the consumer desktop space. And so if we can get some OEMs to start pushing and start building better drivers and better, cleaner experiences from hardware to consumer, I think that this will be really good for Linux. Now, the last thing that we need is to get NVIDIA to finally open source some of their drivers so that we can have good drivers in Linux. There you go, NVIDIA, your challenge. Don't make another GPU next year and just work on open sourcing your drivers. Otherwise, we'll all have to depend on AMD, and that won't be a bad thing. But no, it's really exciting for the community, for a provider, for a hardware builder to be fully supporting this. Now, I know that there are some small System 76 and others that are building Linux laptops and desktops, but there hasn't been any of the large mainstream ones that sell to more general consumers. And so this, I do think, is exciting. Another thing that I would not want you guys to miss out on is DigitalOcean is giving a tech talk called Building an API Gateway to Get Out of Monoliths. So it is completely free, and you can sign up at the link below. I think that you should. I've been to some of their other tech talks. They have been usually of the best quality, way better than you will find on this channel. And is usually a really good place to go and learn something. They have some very knowledgeable and experienced engineers that give these talks, and it has a Q&A at the end, so you'll be able to ask some questions. So I encourage you to go sign up for that and join them. Last bit of little bit of news for you cloud engineers and DevOps people. If you use a MacBook or any Apple product, HashiCorp has now its own homebrew tap. So if you use HashiCorp, probably one of the best Go engineering shops that I have seen. You can get all their stuff from one convenient spot now. So go check out their homebrew tap and start using it if you are a HashiCorp user. And that's it for our general news. I have one project shout out that I'd like to make. It is a project called Keel. I've actually haven't looked at it a whole bunch, looked over the repository a little bit. It was suggested to me on my Discord channel. So if you'd like to join that Discord, the link is in the description down below. But Keel is a Kubernetes one push to deploy tool, as best as I can explain it. It looks like it is designed to try to help facilitate I pushed to my GitHub repository. I had some CI/CD that ran my test and built, and then I want it deployed into my dev environment. Or maybe once it's in dev, maybe make a new deployment and a rolling update into wherever. So it looks like it's a very interesting tool. It looks like it's a pretty easy install via Helm, and it looks to help remove the reliance on command line tools. Anyways, it's worth looking at if you're a Kubernetes operator. As some of you might know, I have released this in podcast form for all of you that might want to listen to it on a commute. And the links for that can be found down below on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor FM. So if you use any of those platforms, the links are below, and you can now start listening to this show once a week, wherever you want, without my face. So if you are on the podcast and you're listening, welcome, and thanks for joining and checking it out. And that's it for the news this week. I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I look forward to bringing you the news next week. My name is Merrick Counts with Null News Now, and I hope everyone has a fantastic next week.